Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm going to be interviewing the famous Gary Arndt from Everything and Everywhere. He is a superb travel blogger. He's one of the first. And we talk about lots of things, about how he gets his flights and hotel bookings. What are his favorite travel apps? Does he consider himself a travel blogger or a photographer? What's the stupidest advice that he hears photographers give people that he disagrees with? What's his dream ultralight camera? What does he think of Instagram? What's the difference between Instagram and Pinterest, and how does he use it? What does he think about AR, augmented reality, and virtual reality? Does he think there's a future for that? What does he give advice for people who are thinking about starting a travel blog, and where should they put their eggs and where should they concentrate? Does he read fiction, nonfiction? What about his podcasting? He talks about how he gets through his emails in his inbox and how he decides whether to say no to somebody or yes, because he seems to do so many things at once. It's amazing. So we dive into the mind and the work that Gary does for everything and everywhere. Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm here with Gary Arndt from Everything and Everywhere. Welcome, Gary.
Thanks for having me.
We've met in San Francisco, and I've always noticed that whenever I'm in conversations with you, you're just a very authentic, blunt, honest guy. And also when you listen to some of your podcasts, when you do your podcast show with Jen Leo and Chris Christensen, the weekly travel show, which never happens weekly, right? That you're very honest and direct and blunt. And I love that about you. Is that just a Midwestern thing? Is that something from Minnesota?
Definitely not a Minnesota thing. Most Minnesotans, they're known for what's called Minnesota nice, which is basically being passive aggressive, which is something I absolutely hate.
Okay.
So it definitely doesn't come from that. I don't know. It's just who I am. Okay. It has its pluses and its minuses. I tend to be very bad with people. Like, I'm not very diplomatic. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times it's like, oh, you shouldn't have said that. It's like, well, they suck. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. And
exactly. Well, I mean, it's really useful, I think, also from a travel perspective, because you come back and you'll just say that you don't like this about a country and you don't care if it's politically incorrect or not.
I don't usually say a lot of that about countries. I think you could say that about a hotel, an airline, maybe a city. But I always hate lumping an entire country together, unless it's a really tiny country, because there's, even for a moderately sized country, there are usually, a lot of diversity. So you can go to a major city and maybe not like that city, and then you get out of the city and it's a completely different experience. So, I try not to paint with too broad of a brush, because I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. They have a bad experience. They go to Mexico and they go to Tijuana and they say, well, this happened to me in Mexico. I hate Mexico. I hate Mexicans. It's like, no, that was just Tijuana, and that, may have just been a fluke thing.
Exactly. It could be a fluke thing. In other words, it just comes down to the people you meet. You might have met the store clerk who was having a bad day, and then the store clerks are rude to you, and then you just had the bad luck to meet the bus driver who is also having a bad day. And then all of a sudden, that was the totality of your, 2/3 of your experiences. So voila, you conclude the whole place.
Yeah, and, I've been, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. You go to the same place twice, and you have a completely different experience based on who you meet, the weather, the festivals that are going on, or whatever. And so if you just evaluated the place based on your first visit, it wouldn't be a very representative view of the place.
Yeah, that's true. And that makes job as a travel blogger, I think, kind of difficult. And I guess some cynics could just say, you guys are full of shit. You're just making all these pontifications about certain places, even though, let's say, people like you and that are trying to be very careful about not making too many generalizations. At the same time, if you come off sounding like a pussy if you're all of a sudden saying, oh, well, they're sometimes nice, they're sometimes bad, it's sometimes good, it's sometimes this. You're not really saying anything about anything because you're just trying to avoid a dogmatic, strong statement. And then you get faulted for that being too much of a generalist. So it makes it really hard as a travel writer, I think. No?
I think it's important to note that a travel writer is not a critic, right? We're not the same as a movie critic or a restaurant critic. And a lot of people want it to be that way, but it's not what it is, where you're trying to pass judgment on something. And a lot of people fault travel writing in general, whether it's magazines or online, for not saying anything negative. And I don't think saying something negative really helps someone. Let's say you go to a hotel in New York and it's a bad hotel. Well, there are 300 hotels in New York. And if I say this hotel is bad, okay, I have now narrowed your choice of hotels from 300 to 299. I really haven't done much to help you. Whereas if I say, this is a good hotel, you might follow my advice and say, okay, I'll think about staying here. And I may have helped solve your problem of finding a hotel, which is why I don't know if, being negative or trying to do what, other critics in other areas do in travel writing is necessarily productive.
I was listening sometime to Tim Ferriss's podcast, and or his books and that kind of stuff, and he always has this whole idea of always trying to say no, 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 no to all sorts of things. And my very first interaction with you, Gary, was when I think I was just starting my blog. This was like 2006 or something like that, or 2007, I can't remember. And you were just allowing pretty much everybody who had a travel blog to be linked to your site. And you didn't really seem to ask too many questions. You're just like, yeah, I'll link to your page from my page. And it was very open. And ever since then, and I was very impressed by that. You're just kind of like, you said yes to that. And if I, have ever sent you an email, boom, you answered it. And it posted anything on your Facebook wall, boom, you answered it. And I know a few years back, I heard you doing an interview where you were basically talking about the fact that you still pride that you answer every single one of your messages, and you don't have a personal assistant or anybody answering it. And you're trying to keep that way as long as possible. And not only that, but you do it so quickly. I mean, it's amazing. Like, I'll write to you and then boom. Is it just I'm lucky, or am I on your VIP list, or I get the impression you do this with everybody?
Probably luck. I mean, if I'm sitting at my computer and an email comes in, I found the most productive thing is just answer it immediately, right? To just send out a sentence.
You and Chris Christensen.
Yeah, because, rather than let it pile up, if it's something that can be answered immediately. The things that tend to pile up in my inbox are things that require me to make a decision, or they're asking something more of me, or I don't know what the hell to say. But if it's just, hey, can we do this? Sure, let's do it now. Boom. Done. That kind of stuff I can do very quickly. I do say no to most things from a business sense. So I get stuff every day in my inbox of people that want me to promote their product or their brand, and I say no to pretty much everything. But in terms of things like interviews, I have a general standing rule to never say no to an interview.
Okay. And that's worked.
Yeah, and I'm not Tim Ferriss, so that's
true.
A big difference.
He probably gets an interview. Yeah. That poor guy probably gets it.
But even then, he does a lot of interviews as well. I mean, he has a book coming out. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and then all of a sudden, Tim Ferriss appears as a guest on every podcast. And then he goes into hiding for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden he makes appearances again.
So how many emails do you have on your inbox, roughly, like normally?
Right now, I have maybe 20.
Are they, you mean unopened or just sitting there?
No, everything's opened. Most of them were in the middle of some sort of dialogue or something.
So you do have almost like a zero inbox wish and goal. Sometimes you achieve it.
Yeah, it's just kind of hard. I mean, I got a couple things, 2 emails from 2017 still. One is a guy I keep putting off. He wants me to take a picture of all my camera gear and send it to him. I just never do it. And again, that's a request where it's like, I got to go and set up crap and take pictures. And
is this just a random fan, or is it a business? Or
no, it's a guy with a website who focuses on like the gear that photographers carry. And I'll probably do it eventually, but it's just, the more you're asking of me, the more time it's going to take, or I'm going to delete it.
I see.
And that's the other thing. There's a lot of people that email me. I will not, especially if they're just asking for something like, "Hi Gary, I don't know you. I want something from you." I'm not going to respond to that. I'll just delete it.
Mm-hmm. What if it's travel advice, like some random person saying, "Hey, I'm going to be going to, I don't know, Thailand, and can you tell me something about it?" Or where?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that if it's a legitimate travel question. Or what I try to do now is I refer them to my Facebook group, which has become a really great source of people answering questions, because it's not just me. Because I don't care how well-traveled anybody is, there's always going to be, if you're in a well-traveled group of people, somebody probably has been, everywhere where it's hard for one person to do it, right?
Right. Yeah, and then also just not everybody's going to hold the same opinion, which is kind of what we alluded to before. So talking about your photography gear, let's talk a little bit about your favorite travel apps and your favorite travel gear and that kind of stuff. So let's get down to the practical stuff. Do you have your top 5, top 3, whatever travel apps that really, really When you reset your phone or buy a new phone, which are the ones you jump to and make sure they're on your phone?
Nothing fancy. I think the whole travel app thing, there are people that just love writing articles and, top travel apps. No, there's no new travel app that I have, really found. It's Google Maps, TripIt.
What about for your booking? How do you book airline flights or hotels? What do you use?
I guess I have various apps for loyalty programs for like airlines and stuff.
Right.
I usually won't do that on my phone. I'll do it on my phone sometimes if I'm on a road trip or something and I'm pulling into a town. But flights, pretty much never. I'll do that on my computer.
And what are your favorite top 2 sites that you go?
It depends. Lately, I've been booking directly with the airlines themselves.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And you find it's a bit cheaper, or?
Well, I might do a search on Expedia or something. There's some other things I've signed up to, like, discount flights. I live in Minneapolis, and pretty much everything for a lot of, all those deals, everything is orientated towards like the major markets like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco.
Right.
So there's some stuff here. So if I need to go to a certain place, I can always check to see if there's any deals or discounts on particular airlines. But a lot of times I don't have any choice because I'm working with another company or a destination and they're flying me out. So they just handle the tickets.
Okay, so you don't have really any big travel apps or even travel websites that you're kind of going to. What about gear? I know I think it was called a Scott jacket or something like that. You had a jacket that you're promoting. They were either sponsoring you or something, but obviously you liked it too.
Scotty Vest.
That's right.
Yeah, they basically have a whole line of clothes, not just, jackets and stuff, that basically are designed for travel. Primarily, they just have a lot of pockets, so they can fit, your cell phone or a Kindle or an iPad, your earbuds, a whole bunch of stuff. It's very handy for going through airports because you just stuff all your crap in your jacket, and then you just take your jacket off, put it through the X-ray machine. You don't have to deal with a lot of things. But yeah.
But they want the laptop to come out of the jacket?
Well, my laptop is usually in my bag.
Oh, okay. So
if you have TSA pre-check, then you don't need to take your laptop out. That can just go right through.
Okay. So then what other gear? So you still use the Scotty Vest and you're still a big fan?
Yeah. I have Scotty Vest pants, even some T-shirts and stuff. Yeah, they make really good stuff. I'm not working with them as an ambassador anymore, but I still use their gear.
Okay. What other travel gear that you're kind of like, if you have to go minimalist and you definitely grab besides that vest and your underwear?
If it's totally minimalist, man, I'm a big believer you really only need 3 things to travel, and that's becoming one thing. And the big thing is, a credit card, your cell phone, and a passport.
Right.
And with my my last trip to London and my last trip to Canada, I managed to not take out any cash, and I was able to pay for everything with my phone using Apple Pay.
Where was this, in Canada?
Yeah. So pretty much everywhere in Canada, I was able to use it.
The world.
I'm not saying it's universal yet, but it's getting pretty ubiquitous, especially in major cities. And it really solves that problem. And the problem's kind of been solved. I'm sure you've had the problem with American credit cards that we didn't have the chip, and now we finally do have the chip, but it's not a chip and pin, it's a chip and sign. Apple Pay just solves all that problems. And it's actually far more secure than using a credit card because you don't expose your number. It uses a one-time hash for every transaction. And it's quick. You hold your phone up to it, you put your thumb on it, beep, done.
Wow.
That's it. There are many airports in the U.S. that are now using mobile passport. So basically you put your passport information in an app, and then you can go to a kiosk and scan it, and it's just as quick as global entry, and you just walk right through. So, and I think Delaware just announced they're starting a beta program for putting a driver's license in your phone. So we're really getting to the point quickly where if you have your phone, that's all you need. And I wrote an article on this several years ago about how you only need those 3 things. And people snarkily pointed out, well, you need a charging cable. Well, you don't need that anymore either because they now have wireless charging in the newest phones. And assuming you were to, go to a hotel or something that had like a wireless charging pad, of which I have not seen these in hotels yet, but I'm certain they're going to start rolling out. You will be able to put a phone in your pocket and travel internationally.
Right, and just the cable. Let's say just the USB cable. Most airlines you can plug in the USB cable.
Right. The only catch right now is I don't know of any other countries that would let you use a mobile passport for entry. I think that New Zealand and Australia were testing something like that. But if you think about it, what is a passport? It's really a number. That part on the bottom of your passport that they actually scan is just name, birth date, passport number. That's easily done, through something like an app. It could very easily be done. There's really no need to have the physical, book and the stamps. So I could very easily see in the not so far future where there's some sort of international standard where countries agree to how they could have a mobile device function as a passport. So yeah, long story short, smartphone is the number one thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, by the way, for people who are listening to this, I'm in Cameroon and I haven't left Africa in 5 years. And so if you're wondering why I'm so amazed by all this Apple Pay stuff, because of course in Africa, there's no such thing as Apple Pay at this point in 2018. I've never seen anything like Samsung Pay or any of this digital paying. I would, if I could say, hey, at the same time though, they do have, I should be cognizant of the fact that in Kenya, for example, and in Tanzania, they do have M-Pesa and certain mobile paying systems, but they just don't use the American system yet. So they have certain countries, they'll have that, but it's very few out of the 54 African countries. Digital pay is maybe in 5 countries, South Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and maybe a few others. But it's changing. It's slowly changing.
I think, over the next 5 to 10 years, any place that accepts a credit card will be able to accept that.
Right. It's just the problem is they don't accept credit cards in probably, I would say 30 out of the 54 countries. I mean, the majority of countries, you just can't use a credit card in Africa. If you show it, you're like, hey, can I buy it? Did I tell you this, Gary, that when I bought my car, I bought a car for $30,000 and I had to pay in cash because I was in Benin and they wouldn't take a credit card or even a wire transfer. They're like, no, we just take cash. I'm like, really? That's crazy. Right.
But, like with a lot of developing countries, they didn't go through a phase where they had wired phones. They just went from nothing to mobile devices, right? They just jumped right into the 21st century. And I could see that maybe being the same thing with they don't have credit cards. I wouldn't say everybody has a phone, but a lot of people have mobile phones in developing countries, and they just go right to those form of payments. So maybe that's what happens.
Right. You're right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And the same thing, they're talking about the same thing with skipping the power line and going straight to solar or localized powers. That's the same thing, skipping that. So, and they are doing that in certain areas. So in some ways, Africa can be the technology vanguard. Now, do you consider yourself a travel photographer or travel blogger? I mean, obviously you're both, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a feeling, Gary, you started off as a travel blogger and then slowly over the years, you kind of morphed more into the photography side of yours became more and more important. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say that's true. It really depends who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to someone that really has no idea how any of this works, I just say I'm a photographer because it's a lot easier. They understand taking pictures. And the moment you say you're a blogger, like, what's that? How do you make money? How does that work? So it's just easier. And I don't work like a normal travel photographer works. Most people envision, you're working for National Geographic or you're on assignment. And I've never, ever worked on assignment for any publication. And quite frankly, with a couple of exceptions, I really have no desire to do that. I would do it maybe to be able to say I did it. To work with National Geographic would be something you do to say that you worked with National Geographic. But I wouldn't do it for the money at this point.
Yeah.
And the blog,
I have no idea. They must pay well, though, on the other hand.
None of the publications just don't pay that well in general anymore. And a lot of the big travel photographers I know, like the guys who've been doing this for decades and have shot for National Geographic and like all the big magazines, they are all envious of what I'm doing. Because
really?
oh yeah, because I can make more money, I have more freedom, I have more control.
But what's to stop them if they're a big time travel photographer or National Geographic photographer? What's to stop them from just trying to copy what you're doing?
I think you get stuck.
I mean, it's not like that hard to get an Instagram account.
No, but it's hard to get a following. And it's a
Right.
completely different model. And, you know, like you were mentioning what I used to do with giving people links. There is a notion of give and take and sharing online. So I'm on your podcast right now. You've been on my podcast before. And that's just kind of what you do, right?
Right.
I'm very open with my photos. You can go to my website and see pretty much every photo I've ever taken. Like 50,000 of them are available online. The old model, these guys would look at what I was doing and think I was crazy because you don't do that. You have to hold your stuff very tight. You have to own the rights, right?
And you got to put that big fat watermark that nobody looks at.
I don't watermark anything ever because
Right.
it just makes them look bad. And so it's a very different mindset of how you work online and how you grow an audience. And their whole business, their whole life was about working with editors, pleasing editors, and doing it that way, never pleasing an audience. And same with travel writing. Whereas, you know, fundamentally, I'm a publisher when you get right down to it.
Yep.
So I have to think like a publisher in terms of, you know, circulation and my audience and all those other things that they never had to think about. And so it's a big mindset shift. There's a couple people who have done it. But for the most part, you know, and also, you know, once you get to a certain age, you don't really want to do something brand new like that. So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, they could do it, but it's a big, big shift.
What's the stupidest advice that you hear some photographers give people out there that you kind of disagree with?
Shoot in manual.
Okay.
Photography is not rocket science. It really isn't. I am completely 100% self-taught. Never took a class, never had a mentor, never read a book. Just figured it out.
And by the way, let me interrupt you, but you have won several awards. Can you list some of the ones that you've been most proud of?
I've been named Travel Photographer of the Year by the Society of American Travel Writers. I was named Travel Photographer of the Year twice by the North American Travel Journalists Association. I've won 3 Lowell Thomas Awards. I've won a couple dozen like NACHA prizes for individual categories, 2 Northern Lights Awards for photographing Canada. Yeah, a whole bunch of stuff.
Right. So continue.
So, and then there's a lot of photographers that like went to school to study photography. And I really think they overthink it. And, you know, the idea of shooting in manual, of controlling everything as opposed to just shooting in aperture priority, you know, maybe that's great if you're using, you know, a silver plated Ansel Adams type camera, or if you're in a studio or something. But for the most part, it's completely unnecessary. And I think they make it, you know, they have this notion of what a real photographer has to do as opposed to what you should do to just get a good photo, which is really all that matters at the end of the day. It's not how you did it. You don't get points for creativity. So you basically have what was the equivalent of a 1980 supercomputer in your camera, so you might as well take advantage of it and let it do some of the work if it can, and just focus on the things that, you know, affect artistically how you want the shot to look. And so,
well, I also think that the post-processing tools have come such a long way that you can really do a lot after you've taken the photo.
For some things, like white balance, you can affect, you can choose, or you can fix that, no problem. You should do as much as you can in the camera, but you're right, you can do a lot in post. And a lot of people don't understand how that works. The term photoshopped has gotten a bad name because of the fashion industry, because they would swap out body parts and make people thinner and do stuff like that. Whereas in reality, most of the touching up you do in a photo is just things that you could have done in a dark room. Shadows, highlights, contrast, color, sharpness, things like that.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. Now, what about your dream ultralight photography gear? Because one of the things I really hate about photography and I do much more videos than I'm much more of a video guy than a photography guy. But what I hate about both of these things is the weight of these things. Is there? I know you have I think you bring like 2 lenses or something like that. Maybe you bring 3 lenses.
3 lenses,
travel.
But I don't really travel with a lot of gear currently. I don't know if I'd want to get much lighter. I have a Sony A7R II, which is my go-to camera, and I might swap that out for like the A7 III at some point. But I have no real need to change. I carry an A6000, which is a very small camera as a backup, and I have 3 lenses. So I really use about half a camera bag, and the rest I devote to just general electronics, my computer, wires, stuff like that.
Okay, so you've gotten pretty minimalist.
Most travel photographers I know have a very similar gear setup. It changes a bit if you're going to go shoot wildlife, because then you need some pretty long lenses, tripod, and you can't do it quite as light. But if you're just going to go and just kind of generally shoot stuff and it's not wildlife, yeah, you can get by pretty light. And like I said, most photographers, they may carry a few other lenses with them, but they don't go nuts, because versatility and the ability to get the shot is more important than having the perfect lens and everything perfectly set up, which, selecting the lens and getting it set up and everything may cause you to miss a shot.
Right. Now, what is your pet peeve about Instagram? You've got to have some.
Oh, there's a lot not to like about Instagram. I think it's become kind of its own thing. I think we've reached peak Instagram. I don't think, I'm not saying it's going to go away or it's going to die, but I don't think it's going to get any bigger in terms of what it is. I think a lot of people, especially younger people, are obsessed with becoming Instagram famous. And a lot of that has to do with how they view themselves. So if you look at my Instagram account, I've posted well over 2,000 photos, and I believe one of those photos, a single photo, has a picture of me in it. Everything else is just photos I've taken. And the majority of what you'd call the Instagram influencers all take pictures of themselves. And some of them take it to an extreme where they're changing their clothes multiple times a day. And, to a certain extent, I have to confess, it works. There is a certain demographic that just cares about clothing and stuff. I don't think they really.
But even in the travel place, you've got some sexy women who dress, like in bikinis all the time, and that really seems to work for them.
Well, sure, bikinis always help, but I always question whether or not people are following it because of the destination they're wearing the bikini or the fact that they're wearing a bikini. A really good example, if you were probably to the top of the totem pole in terms of Instagram influencers is Kim Kardashian. She has an enormous following, and, all the members of the Kardashian clan have been known to have sales spike of shoes or handbags or beauty products when they mention it on their Instagram account. Well, several years ago, Kim Kardashian went to Armenia, and she went there with her husband, Kanye West, and I think Khloe Kardashian went there as well. So, this is like a murderer's row of Instagram influencers going to Armenia, and everyone thought, oh my God, Armenia is going to get so much tourism because of this. Nope. Tourism didn't budge. Nobody went to Armenia. Interesting. Because nobody is following Kim Kardashian for travel advice. And the kind of person that's going to go to Armenia is probably not the kind of person that follows Kim Kardashian. And
well said.
And I think a lot of marketing people are figuring this out, that, and the same thing happened when Oprah went to Australia. She took her show to Australia the last year she did her show, and everyone's like, oh, this is incredible for Australia tourism. They're getting so much marketing. And they spent millions of dollars to fly Oprah out. And the next year, American tourism to Australia dipped 0.8%. Because Oprah's audience, the people who are watching television in the middle of the day are not the kind to get on a 12 to 16 hour flight to go to Australia. They're going to go to Branson, Orlando, Las Vegas, wherever. They're not going to Australia.
Right. Hold on one second. Rejoice, can you turn on the fan? I'm going to edit this out, Gary, but it's just too hot here. It's like 89 degrees and it's 5 a.m. It's so hot here.
It snowed here.
Turn on the fan.
It is snowing right now, and it's April.
Amazing.
That is bullshit. I did not sign up for this.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Can you hear that fan too much? I'm going to edit out my voice most of the time when you're talking. I can just silence my voice. But can you hear that fan?
Yeah, I can.
You can? Okay. Well, it's all right. We'll turn off the fan then. Suffer through the sauna. What we do for good podcast audio. Okay, we'll continue. Okay, now, Gary, what's the difference between Instagram and Pinterest? These are two things. They seem to be, are they which one is worthwhile for a travel blogger?
Both, but for completely different reasons. They're totally different. So Instagram is a social platform. You post things, people follow you, they like it, they comment, you post the next thing.
But you can't share it. Like, let's say if I see a great Instagram thing, I can't republish it and say, hey, I want to share this with all my followers.
Not easily, no. That's not built in, but there are still people that kind of do it.
Right.
Pinterest.
And that's another thing that pisses me off, by the way, about Instagram is that I see some travel blogging accounts and they have some amazing, amazing professional photos. And I'm almost certain that they haven't taken those photos.
Probably not. I know there's a lot of big accounts.
I wish somebody would say, hey, come on, these photos I've taken versus, every photo in your Instagram account is taken by you, Gary, right? You don't republish.
Yeah, it's a point of pride.
Right.
I'm a photographer, but there are big accounts like Beautiful Destinations. Yeah, they just use other people's photos.
Right. It's fine. Also, by the way, I have no problem with people using other people's photos if they credit the person who took it. Like
mostly
National
they do.
Geographic.
Yeah,
okay.
Like the big accounts do.
Yeah, like National Geographic, they'll always credit people, which makes sense. Anyway, I'm sorry. You're about to talk about Pinterest.
Oh, and Pinterest is really a search engine. It's a search engine for images. So the fact that you have followers or all that stuff doesn't matter on Pinterest really at all.
So would you say that Pinterest is kind of like a competition to image.google.com?
No, because it's a search engine for images where people upload the images particularly to Pinterest, and they usually have text on the image. For most bloggers, Pinterest is the number 2 source of traffic after Google.
Wow, really?
Oh, yes. Not even close. Google is number 1 by a lot, and then very firmly number 2 is Pinterest, and then number 3 is whatever.
Really?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just so I guess you're suggesting that travel bloggers should start paying attention to Pinterest.
Most of them are. Oh, you'll see there's tons of Facebook groups and whatnot that are all about Pinterest.
See, I've been living under a rock. In fact, it's in a rock in Africa for the last 5 years. So I've lost the touch with all these little details.
The great part about Pinterest is you don't, for Instagram, I physically have to do it. With Pinterest, you can farm that out. Someone else from a completely different Pinterest account could post pins for your site. So it doesn't have to be you doing the work necessarily. You could hire a VA or something to do most of it.
I guess. All right. Well, so basically your bottom line is get involved in Pinterest if you want to kind of spread the word of whatever you're blogging about.
If you want to drive traffic to your website, yeah, I would say you pretty much have to be doing Pinterest stuff.
Interesting. Okay, well, I'll keep that in mind for the next year. What about your travel pet peeves? I know you probably don't like TSA, and I know you don't like reclining seats. What else? I know Rick Steves had this thing on. He had a short video where he hated like a hotel that put like a dozen pillows on his bed.
Yeah, I hate that. I hate not having power outlets on top of the desk, where you have to find the outlet, and sometimes you end up having to move the whole piece of furniture the TV is mounted on, because the room's a bit older. They weren't thinking about people plugging things in, or you have to take the coffee maker off the desk because it takes up all the space, and they assume that's the only thing people care about. Yeah, I don't like reclining seats. I never recline my seat unless there's an overnight flight, and you've kind of, it's kind of like everyone's sleeping. That's the only time I'll ever recline my seat on a plane, if I'm in economy. TSA is just something you have to suffer through. Your best bet is to just shut your mouth and deal with it, because you're not going to win. So, and it's usually, I'm to a point now, if you've got TSA pre-check, it's pretty easy to get through all that stuff.
Yeah, I have no idea what that is, but I'll look into it. I've heard about it, but
once you're back in the U.S., global entry, you sign up for it, you pay a fee, you go in for an interview at the airport.
Is it a one-time fee or an annual fee?
I think it's an annual fee, or like 2 years or something. But you go in for an interview. The interview is really quick. I mean, it's like, have you ever been arrested? No. Okay. They take your fingerprints, and then when you go through passport control entering the U.S., you just go to a kiosk, and it takes like 2 minutes, and then you're done. You just don't have to wait in line. And I usually get through passport control so fast that I'm just stuck waiting for my bag. So, because there's just nothing. I mean, there's just nothing to it. And it also gives you
Is it just for international flights?
For coming into the U.S., global entry, yeah. But TSA pre-check, which is part of it, you get to go into the TSA pre-check line, which is usually faster. You don't have to take off your shoes. You don't have to take off your belt. You don't have to take out your laptop. And it's a much faster way to get through security.
Okay. And again, you have to pay some fee.
That's all part of the global entry thing. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, I'll look into these things when I eventually come back to America. What about virtual reality? It's something that's been sitting around for about 30 years. Do you think it's ever going to impact the travel industry in the next decade?
Nope.
Okay. Why is that?
We, from the day we were born, live in a 360-degree environment. What we don't do every day of our lives is turn around looking at what's behind us. And if you look at how people behave when they put on a VR headset, that's what the first thing they do, right? They turn their head around, they look up, they look down, and all they're doing is taking in the novelty of having this thing on their face. When you do storytelling, right, you're asking someone to focus on something, the actor, the presenter, whatever it might be. The storyteller is saying, look here, this is what's important. So we've had theater in the round for thousands of years, right? I think the Greeks had it, where the audience surrounds the actors. We could have had the opposite of that, where the actors surround the audience, and the audience is constantly having to turn around to see what's happening. That would have been the equivalent of VR in ancient Greece. And it's stupid. It makes no sense, right? Making the audience continually turn their heads and turn around to see what someone is saying. And that's what most of the VR gimmick is. It's just look what's behind you.
But what about, hold on, let's just say that the VR worlds become so perfectly accurate that you can just fly into a place, like Superman, and then land into the Forbidden City in Beijing and walk everywhere or jump everywhere and check out every little thing. And it's so realistic that it's, because of the fact that you can fly around and jump around, it's actually better than the real reality.
We have 4K video right now that is amazing. And there are things you can get, whether it's streaming online or stuff, that has amazing videos of fantastic places around the world shot in 4K. And almost nobody watches that. So again, there's a novelty aspect. I'm sure that at trade shows, there will be places that will continue to use VR to show people stuff. But in terms of like an actual thing that people use, there might be some applications. There could be a popular game that comes out. I don't discount the possibility of that. But no, it's never going to be a widespread thing because at the end of the day, you have to have something on your face. And you can only do that for so long. You have to wear goggles.
I see what you mean.
You know,
yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
if they could maybe invent a holodeck, that might be different. But the fact that it's still something on your face, yeah, like I could see a game, I can see some industrial uses, telemedicine, or some other very, very niche things like that. But you can go to Best Buy right now, and there are VR goggles that are available, and no one buys them because there's no good apps for them that are available. And at the end of the day, most storytelling, again, it's going to be focusing someone's attention on a thing. There was a 360-degree video I saw on Facebook that someone posted, and it was of some people dancing in a museum, like ballet. And I watched the ballet people, then I turned the camera around, and there was nothing else. I'm like, well, why did you shoot this in 360? It's dancers, which you could have shot with a normal camera, and then a bunch of walls. Why do I want to look at the walls? What was the point of shooting it like this? So I think there's a lot of novelty. And you know, this sort of stuff has been around a while. There's been QuickTime VR and other 360 videos that have been around a while. And again, it's a novelty. But it's like, oh, I can actually see, you know, what it looks like across the street from the Forbidden City, or, you know, because you always see one view of it, right? You always see the same view of the Taj Mahal, so you can see what it looks like looking backwards. And again, that's a novelty, but most people, I just don't think, are interested in it.
But I think the way you're describing the VR here, you're thinking mostly of kind of a more or less fixed point where you can turn around, look up and down, and do 360. But when I'm talking about VR, I'm talking about the ability to actually then explore the Forbidden City and go down even every single nook and cranny, go through all of Beijing for that matter, or all of China eventually, and just see from every single angle, open doors, go behind things, all sorts of stuff, not just being kind of fixed.
No, I mean, like I said, we have some great stuff now. No one uses it. If they're going to be first of all, if you can get that sort of view of something, to create that, it's going to have to be something virtual. Because to get video shots of every angle of the Forbidden City, you're going to have drones flying around all over the place and stitching it together in weird ways. You're going to see that in World of Warcraft before you're going to see it, you know, using it to fly around the Forbidden City. So that's what I'm saying. It could exist. I could see it maybe taking off in video games, but not for travel stuff. Because even travel videos today, I mean, they're not that popular. It has a niche audience, but even then, the most popular ones, it's the personality of the presenter, I think, more than the pretty pictures of the destination.
Right. All right. Well, I'm still, I guess, more bullish than you about the possibility of, not that I'm thrilled with people giving up physical travel and getting into a real plane and going somewhere, but I think at some point people are going to really do VR, and it's going to take off for the travel industry.
And let me tell you another reason why. So you're about the same age I am, I think.
Yeah, I'm 1970.
Music used to be a thing that people collected because there was a tangible physical aspect to music. And you could go to record stores and maybe you knew someone that was into a certain band, or they had like these rare, you know, oh, this is a European version, and you had to go to this record store to get it. It was an import. And there was that element of music, right? Or maybe somebody collected like Grateful Dead concerts, or, this is a bootleg from a Beatles studio session. I remember stuff like that in college. Now, music is everywhere, right? It's on Spotify. You don't need to buy anything anymore. It's become universal and ubiquitous. And what's changed is you now are seeing people treating music, they're treating food that way. And I think travel has become that way. So it's a way, it's something that can't be digitized. You can't, you're not going to have a Spotify for food. It has to be a tangible thing. And so people are becoming kind of foodies. The food culture has increased. And you're also seeing, I think, an increase in travel as well, And I don't think it's ever going to replace travel any more than, VR is going to replace going to a restaurant.
Okay. What about AR? What's it called? AR is enhanced, and that's not enhanced. What's AR again? Augmented reality.
Yeah. Again, if it requires wearing something on your face like Google Glass, it'll be as successful as Google Glass. There are limited uses of it, but I think most of those uses can come from holding a camera or a smartphone in front of you and using the camera for it. I don't think, there's a big backlash that's happening right now with social media and, a backlash towards people constantly looking at their phones. I'm not entirely certain that having glasses on your face that's constantly getting data is going to be something that even would be desirable. So again,
but you think that it could? You think it could be? Let's say you hold up your phone, and then it gives you that augmented reality by looking through the phone camera on your screen.
There could be applications. Yeah, I mean, first of all, it doesn't require any new technology. I mean, you're using what everyone already has, so that's a big plus. So, and it's not like you have to get virtual reality goggles and put them on your face. But let's say you're in a museum and you just point your camera at a painting and then it pops up a description of the painting. That would be a simple application of it. And this is already being done to a limited extent with Google Translate, where you can hold your phone up to a sign and it will read the sign and translate it. So, yeah, I think there's definitely some application for that, and some of it already exists. Even to a limited extent, it isn't quite what people think of it, but even like QR codes are kind of sort of like that, insofar as you can point your camera at something and get information. Not a very elegant implementation of it, but kind of, sort of. But I could certainly see something like that happening, like I said, with a museum or a street sign or something where you're in a city where you just point your phone at something and it'll give you information for it.
Okay, so that might pick up, even though VR may not.
Right. I think they're very different things.
Let's shift to the business of travel blogging. I'm curious about these things that, since you have been doing this for, 12 years now or so?
The website will have been up for 12 years next October. So I've been traveling now 11 years.
Nice. So what is a common error that you see travel bloggers do?
They do the same thing everybody else does. There are so many bloggers now, and I can't tell them apart. I don't know who they are. They're all just kind of the same, doing the same thing, writing the same articles. Here's 10 things to do in Paris. Great family trips in Tuscany. There's nothing wrong with that kind of article, intrinsically. But if that's all you do, if you have no thoughts and opinions, it's kind of boring. And I also think that where you travel should be kind of interesting as well. I'm guessing the vast, vast majority of travel bloggers have not been to Cameroon.
That's true.
And one of the advantages when I started, and this wasn't something I planned, it just kind of happened. I started traveling in 2007 when I sold my house. I started in the Pacific. And so I started island hopping, going to kind of oddball places. And I think in hindsight, that helped me because it was different. It was interesting. And it kind of set me apart. Even though there weren't a lot of bloggers at the time, I was doing something different. And a lot of people, they go on their gap year around the world trip and they're kind of doing the same route. Australia, Bangkok, London, maybe Hong Kong, a stop in India or something like that. But it's kind of the same thing, right? They're not going to East Timor. They're not going to Equatorial Guinea. They're not doing that sort of stuff. And I think, and there's nothing wrong with, Australia or Bangkok or any of those places. I've been there. Right? They're fine places. But I do think if you're going to try to make a career out of traveling and having an audience, you need to do something different and interesting.
Right. Yeah. In my case, I focus more on a particular region. I really do a hard, deep dive into it, like Eastern Europe, 3.5 years, didn't leave, constantly in Eastern Europe for 3. Then Africa, 5 years, didn't leave. Very all in kind of thing, as opposed to kind of bouncing around as much. And so as a result, I get kind of that niche that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I definitely think that a lot, I think your travel resume can be thought of as a piece of content. Or certainly it's something that you can point to show authority and expertise. And a lot of people don't think about that. In theory, you could never leave your house and you could start a travel blog and you could write. And Lord knows there's a lot of writers out there that put together top 10 lists without ever visiting the places. So it could be done, but I don't think anyone's, you may get traffic, but you're not going to get an audience.
Speaking about getting an audience, where do you get the biggest bang for your buck or your time and your effort? Would you say Instagram, your blog, your podcasts, your guest blogging, your Facebook groups, you got TBEX, you got photography contests, so many different places where you can really put effort, and you have put effort into. Where do you find the biggest return measured on two issues? One is the number of new followers and acquiring new followers and people. And then the second is which one is more lucrative. So break that down. What do you think?
It's changed a lot. It's changed several times, and it's changed recently. Getting new followers on Instagram has really changed because they've changed their algorithm. And a lot of people I know have just stalled in terms of audience growth. So even though you can get engagement on Instagram, it's become very hard to grow your audience.
Why is that? I have no idea, by the way, because I don't.
Algorithmic stuff. And that's the problem. Anytime I put a lot of emphasis on social media the last several years. And the problem with that is you are always reliant on someone else, their platform. So Facebook has become, like Facebook fan pages, useless. Absolutely useless. Might as well not even have it because they've changed their algorithm so much, which part of me also thinks is the reason Facebook's having so many problems is that they have, so long as, magazines and newspapers could get something from Facebook, they never really attacked them that hard. But when they did the algorithm change at the start of this year, Facebook became absolutely useless because they could get nothing from Facebook. And so they turned on them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I got lucky because I never did create a Facebook fan page. I've always just had my own personal profile, and that's all I have. I don't. Actually, that's not true. I have one for my book, but basically, I don't have anything else. And I've heard this complaint recently. But what happened with Instagram? What did they do differently?
Changes to the way the feed, the changes to the way you discover people.
Who's benefited from the change, and who's done better?
It always benefits Instagram, which is owned by Facebook. That's really all that matters. And I think what a lot of, at least they've been smart. They haven't, slit their own throats like Snapchat has, where they've really hurt themselves. And this has happened to a lot of. A whole bunch of things. They changed their app, which pissed a bunch of people off. And then they did this thing with Rihanna, where somebody ran an ad that was like, punch Rihanna. So she deleted her Snapchat account, and they lost like $1 billion in valuation the next week because a bunch of people followed Rihanna. And a lot of these places, it was the influencers. And I'm not talking people like me. I'm talking like the Rihannas and the Kim Kardashians that really built the platform. And then once they get to a certain level, they just they don't care about them anymore. And they don't realize the power that they still have, which is a lot. And that's it. I saw it happen on Pinterest. They had a lot of very influential people, and they kind of did things that screwed them over. And if you want, I think these people have to always keep in the back of their mind MySpace because that can happen to them. I know when a company is at the peak of their power, it's very difficult to think that they could disappear. But if you remember 20 years ago, everyone thought Microsoft was invincible, right? And they're still a pretty big company. They do make a lot of money, but they're not.
And before that, IBM was
exactly
big before.
IBM just keeps, they only stay in business by laying people off.
Right.
So there's no reason to think that this won't happen to the Facebooks of the world and every other company. It probably will eventually, but
yes,
Facebook, I think, is
Yeah, I
probably
agree.
more ripe for it.
Yeah, Facebook will eventually be replaced by some. It doesn't necessarily mean it will go away, just like MySpace is still around, I think. But
Well, it got bought and rechanged, and it's a music platform or something, but no one uses it.
right. And then and IBM is still around, and Microsoft's still around, but they've certainly been degraded. So, getting back to the original question, I mean, where would you, if you're a starting travel blogger, starting out in the space, where would you put your eggs at this point, even though recognizing that at any moment that may change?
In my website and growing an email list, because you control it.
Because at least you can control that, yeah.
Right. And
It's interesting because your answer is exactly what I heard Tim Ferriss say recently. He said something similar, which is basically he's been doubling down and putting a lot of effort trying to build his email list because it's the one thing that he can kind of be sure to have, and he can actually move it from provider to provider, email blaster to email blaster, like Aweber, and go to another place and take it.
And I should also
he can't take.
I should also add podcasting, because when I meet readers in person, almost the first thing they always mention is my podcast. And in terms of raw numbers of all the things I do, the podcast stuff is not the biggest thing, not by a long shot, not when you look at it compared to Instagram and other social platforms. But it has the biggest impact because they hear my voice, they listen to me talk, and they get a better feel for who I am through a podcast than you ever will get on a social platform. And I think that deeper engagement is going to become more important in the future than, if you think about it, an Instagram like is like the bottom of the barrel when it comes to engagement, right? Mm-hmm. It's a 1 second button click, and that is all. It's something, but it's hard to get less than that. The only thing below that is nothing itself. So if you think of the time commitment involved, the total cumulative time for getting, let's say, 1,000 likes on a photo, just to make the math easy, you're looking at maybe 1,000, let's say generous, let's say maybe up to 5,000 seconds of attention.
Right.
And how many seconds are we at so far in this podcast already?
Exactly.
So it takes only a few podcast downloads to equal what thousands of likes on Instagram could be.
Right. Interesting. And by the way, you can plug your podcast show because you actually have several, I think.
Yeah, I got 2 and a third I'm about to launch. This Week in Travel.
So talk about that.
Which we've been doing for 9 years now. And as we like to point it out,
it's always been Jen Leo, Chris Christensen, and you. The three of you have been consistent.
Yeah, we've never changed the format. And as we like to point out, it's This Week in Travel, not Every Week in Travel. Because it's hard getting 3 of us together. So lately, we do it maybe once a month or whenever we can.
But it's amazing to me that you guys have stuck with it. I mean, because I'm always amazed, let's say, the Rolling Stones or U2, these rock bands that somehow managed to stay with each other through the thick and thin for decades. And in some ways, just coordinating you 3 people, not that you have all the excitement of a rock band, but still just to stick with it, relatively consistently. That's pretty remarkable.
Well, we've never made a dime off the show, ever. Mm-hmm. And I do literally mean a dime. We've made nothing. And
why is that? Why did you guys never decide to do any kind of ads or sponsorship at this point? Because I imagine you get, how many listeners, how many downloads do you have nowadays?
Oh, not a ton. It's, I don't know, we get maybe 10 to 20,000 a month.
Okay. But that's enough to make something. I mean, theoretically.
Yeah, but you
decided.
You split it 3 ways, and then
Yeah.
Maybe you're covering your costs. It's just not what it's really done more than anything else is we've been doing it a long time, and we've been able to meet and get to know a lot of influential people in the travel industry. And that's really been the biggest thing, I think. I think we'd have much better numbers if we recorded more. I mean, 10,000 is what we'll get if we don't record any episodes. So if we actually do an episode, we get more. And that's been the biggest stumbling block. And it's not the primary thing for any of us. Chris has his podcast, which gets a lot more traffic.
Yeah.
I have a podcast that I was doing with CBS.
By the way, it's called Amateur Traveler, by the way,
Right.
for those who don't know.
Yeah, so he's doing like 250,000 downloads a month. But what he does is his shows are kind of evergreen. So he'll talk about a country or a region, and then if you're searching for that, you may come across one of his shows and listen to it. This Week in Travel is not evergreen content. It's timely, it's news, and no one has any need to listen to a 5-year-old episode of that podcast.
That's not true, because if you want to listen to, let's say, a particular guest that you have, then that could be relevant.
Except nobody actually does. I mean, they just
Fair
don't.
enough.
The other podcast, which is kind of, I record it when I feel like it, is the Global Travel Conspiracy. That started with CBS. They launched a podcast channel. I thought, oh wow, CBS, they're a notable brand. They do a lot of radio. They actually have a large radio network. And I thought, oh well, they would be a good group to partner with. Turns out they know nothing about podcasting. They did a horrible job. They ended up putting, they never spoke to me again once the podcast got launched. They cared more about pro wrestlers and reality show contestants who got podcasts. And eventually I just stopped doing it, and because they never sold any ads. And then they gave me the rights. They just gave me all the audio, and we reposted it with a new intro, got rid of the ad, the stuff that they put in the show. And I relaunched it, but I'm just kind of doing it infrequently when I have someone I want to interview. So it's just
okay.
It's kind of like
and
this.
That's your second. Do you have a third one?
Yeah, so I'm just launching that, and that's a totally different thing. It's a monologue show, and it's not really a travel show. It's a history show.
Okay. So you're like a Dan Corwin or whatever that guy's name is.
Carlin, yeah, but it's he'll do a big series on World War I. Or
Genghis Khan.
Yeah, stuff like that. This show, every episode is going to be on something totally different. Just random stuff. So to give you an example, the first episode is about the Mona Lisa. And it was my attempt to answer the question, why is this painting of a basically unknown woman the most famous painting in the world? Why?
It is interesting. I just finished reading the biography by Walter Isaacson about Da Vinci. I just finished reading it, and I learned a ton about the Mona Lisa that I didn't know. I didn't know that Leonardo was kind of carting this around for about 15, 16, 17 years of the last. And then when he died, they found it next to his in his room, I guess. He was still holding onto it, making micro adjustments, changes. He never did actually deliver it to the person.
But the book never actually
But yeah, it's a good question. It's like
why it's the most popular.
Right, and that's right. And I was showing it to Rejoice, my wife, and she's from Cameroon, and I was like, she's looking at this, and she's like, why is this painting so famous? I'm like,
oh, well, there's an answer. It's because it was stolen. In the early 20th century, it was stolen. And prior to that point, it was known in art circles. It wasn't, it didn't have the notoriety it has today. But it was stolen right out of the Louvre. Guy just put it under his coat, walked away with it. And it was missing for 3 years. And the guy was Italian and brought it back to Italy, tried to sell it, got caught. And when they returned it to the Louvre, it went on this tour through Italy and through France, stopping in all these cities, and tens of thousands of people turned out. And this is how it became the most famous painting in the world. And it became this thing, the whole, it being stolen and everything else. And it got in papers around the world. And then so for a lot of people, this was the only work of art they knew by name or that they saw an image of. So whenever someone referenced art, you referenced the Mona Lisa because it was the thing people knew. And the other thing that I wanted to do an episode about is I had read a statistic that 1/4 of the people that visit the Louvre go to see the Mona Lisa and leave.
Right.
And in the course of the research for this, I read some stuff from the guy who's the head of the Louvre, and that number is not correct. It's 80%.
Really?
Yep. They go to the Louvre and they leave. And, being in that room is kind of fascinating. So that's the first episode. I'm then going to do one on the pyramids. I'm going to do one on Polynesian navigators. I'm going to do one on the GPS system. and how that works and everything that's involved. Because I've often thought if you were to bring someone, say, from 300 years ago to the modern world, what would be the thing that would be the hardest thing to describe to them? I think it would be the GPS system, because it combines so much stuff. You have to explain rocketry, satellites, electronics, computers, radio waves, all the things that were discovered in the 19th and 20th century all kind of come together in the GPS system. And you can't take one part out. Relativity is part of it. You have to compensate for relativity with GPS satellites. So things like that. It's kind of a show just about, curiosity. And it's not a travel show per se, but a lot of it comes from things I encountered traveling.
Interesting. Yeah. And it reminds me of Arthur C. Clarke when you're talking about GPS, when he said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Right.
So I think those people from 300 years ago, you would, instead of explaining all that stuff that you just talked about, you just say, you know what? It's just magic.
Well, and the other reason is I've become fascinated lately. There's been a growing number of people in the 21st century who believe the earth is flat.
Yeah.
And it's happened because of YouTube, where people put these videos and they see the videos and they believe it. And so there's a growing flat earth movement. And there's been some NBA stars and other people who, and it's an easy thing to prove, right? But they just can't, it's like, well, it doesn't look round. And that's basically their evidence, right? But
at least not in Texas.
And I think the reason for that is I'm a big believer that there's only two things you need to teach a child. You need to teach them how to read, and you need to teach them to be curious. Because if they're curious and they can read, they can learn a lot of stuff themselves. That's basically what I did growing up, and kind of what I've still done throughout my whole life. And if you're not curious, you can put someone in a classroom, but they're not going to learn anything. They don't care. They don't want to be there. And we have a lot of people in our society who are like that. They went through the motions. They may have a degree. They may have gone to college. They don't know shit. And I think that curiosity is not something that's bound by intelligence or education. My dad never went to college, but he would watch stuff on the Discovery Channel, or he'd subscribe to National Geographic, and he was interested in how things work. And so that, I think, is one of the things I really want to address with that podcast.
I agree with you 100%. Just interesting from a personal level. My father didn't graduate from college. He was a college dropout. My mom dropped out of high school. And yet, especially my mom is super, super curious person. She's always, when she doesn't know a word, she'll run to the dictionary. She'll look up things. She's constantly curious. And I respect that so much more than if you went to Harvard or whatever. It's more telling, I think, if you're a curious person. What's the name of the podcast going to be?
Everything Everywhere.
Okay.
I purposely did not use that as the name of any of my previous shows because I wanted to save it. I didn't want to use it with CPS because I didn't want them to have any claim on the name. But one of the smart things I did when I started is I picked a name for my website that was completely open-ended and generic. It wasn't Backpacking Gary Trip Around the World or something like that. It was just open-ended, so I can really talk about whatever I want, and that is exactly what I intend to do.
Got it. So then this will be, what about the global travel conspiracy? You'll keep that going, I guess?
Yeah, infrequently. When I find guests that I want to talk to, and it may not even be travel related, but just people I find interesting and an excuse to interview them. I thought of considering just, putting in an email and asking like Neil deGrasse Tyson to get on the show. Because I've seen a lot of interviews with him and everyone asks him the same questions. And like, I want to ask him, so like, okay, you're the head of the Rose Planetarium. Do you do research anymore?
Right.
I don't think he does, because he's in a unique position where he has become the voice of, in the face of science, right? Carl Sagan used to have that role. And there's been other people I think that have had that role. And that's kind of his role now, is he is the public face that represents kind of all of science. And that's kind of a job in and of itself, just explaining how the world works.
I remember one time I listened to several things that Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about, and I remember one time he had a guest on, and I can't remember now. In fact, the fact that the guest said, and Neil was like, "Huh, really? I didn't know that." And yet I was like, "I know that. How can you not know that, Neil? I guess you're not studying your books as much as you should, because he's doing so much evangelizing about science in general, and so maybe he sometimes falls behind on some of the research just because he's repeating answers to the same questions."
But yeah, it's basically, like I said, an excuse for me to interview people I want. So it's there, and there are people that still discover it because they're still writing me saying, I just listened to such and such show. But yeah, so that's kind of the plan.
So, and like Dan Carlin, who does hardcore history, he's not a historian, and I don't think you are either, correct?
No. When I was in college, I triple majored in math, economics, and political science. And then I went back after I sold my company and I studied geology and geophysics. So you read a lot, Gary. What percentage of the stuff you read is nonfiction? All.
Okay.
With some exceptions. When there's a new Dune book that comes out, I read that. And the new Dune books are written by Frank Herbert's son, and they're not really that good, but I feel like I have to read them because I've read everything else several times. I'll read the new Game of Thrones book when it comes out because I've read all those. That's about it. I don't read like normal popular fiction and things like that. It's all nonfiction, and it's all.
And the nonfiction is all over the place?
Yeah. So
okay.
I just finished. I read the Walter Isaacson book about Da Vinci that you read. Today I just started reading a book about German American heritage because, as you may guess by my last name, I have German ancestry. And German Americans are the largest ethnic group in the United States. Yet we have no day of celebration. There's no cultural things. There's not German pride festivals. And this all had to do with World War I. And a lot of people don't know. There were like 30 Germans lynched during World War I. There was a lot of German violence. There were families stripped of their kids. German people sometimes changed their name. And it became unfashionable very quick being German. And World War II didn't help. So it's kind of this hidden ethnic group. I've even talked to the German Tourism Board about this, that, you have a lot of people that go back to like Ireland and Italy to go back to the old country, and Germans never do that.
That's fascinating.
So yeah, I'm just curious about it. So.
Okay. So we completely went off topic because we were talking way back when about the biggest bang for your buck for the new followers and most lucrative. We were talking, I think you had mentioned basically the takeaway was work on your website, your blog, your email list. And that's your big thing because the other things are more vulnerable to the vagaries of the social media algorithm changes. Is that pretty much a good summary about that?
Yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't be on social media. I'm just saying it's a very different landscape today than it was 5 years or 10 years ago. And
do you do Snapchat?
Nope, never did it because I am an adult. Okay. Literally Snapchat, the demographics for Snapchat are such that it was not only just very, very young, but when a lot of the data I saw said when people reach the age of 25, they stopped using it. Because the way you talk to your friends when you're in high school and college, like showing them pictures and, making goofy faces, you don't do that as an adult. You don't do that with people you know from work. And so people would just stop using it. So it wasn't something that they started using and then it grew with them. It wasn't Led Zeppelin. It was Sean Cassidy.
Got it.
If I can explain it in musical terms.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
And so then what about lucrative wise? Where do you kind of see out of all those groups and, the podcast, you have a blog, the Facebook groups, the T-Bex.
For me, it's mostly
the contests,
brand ambassadorships. And that comes from all those things together.
Right.
But over the last year, I've been kind of redoing my whole website and rebuilding the business from the ground up because I never wrote things with an eye towards SEO. I never did a lot of those generic things to do posts. And so I get far less traffic on my website than a lot of people that have been doing this the same amount of time I am because I never went down that route. So I've been, but by the same token, I should add, from a strict technical SEO standpoint, I have a better link profile than all but maybe one or two travel bloggers because I have links from, many of the top websites. Not just that, but like Adobe, UNESCO, the New York Times, a lot of these high profile places. So it's been kind of restarting things. And so I've actually started doing display advertising in the last 6 months. I never did that before. I'm doing affiliate ads now. I've never did that before. And trying to actually start doing passive income from my website.
Okay, so you are doing display ads after
now
a decade
yeah.
of. Okay, so that may boost up a little bit of the revenue. So tell us a little bit about those. I know you did Gap Adventures. You were an ambassador there. You did TripIt, I think, and you did that. Scotty Vest.
Yeah, Gap Adventures is now called G Adventures. They actually changed their name a couple of years ago.
That's right.
Yeah, they had a lawsuit with the Gap clothing store because somehow it was confusing buying khakis and going to Antarctica. So I worked with G from 2010 to 2016, and then they stopped their influencer program, and then they started it up again this month. So I'm working with them again.
Okay.
So yeah, and a lot of the other things come and go. I think companies are wising up to the fact that long-term relationships work better than short-term campaigns do. In a lot of places, especially if you're using an agency, they think in terms of campaigns. It's like, okay, we have this amount of time and we're going to get all these people and everyone send out one tweet and one Instagram post and that's our campaign. That really doesn't work very well. And it doesn't work very well, especially, from an influencer standpoint. I don't think I want to be promoting a bajillion products because it makes you look like a sellout, and you're giving your readers
Kim Kardashian.
Yeah, you're giving your readers whiplash, and you want to be able to associate yourself with something, a long-term product. This might be a really dated analogy, but Bob Hope always used to do specials on TV. I don't know if you remember those.
I do.
Okay, do you remember the company that sponsored him?
No clue.
Texaco. Texaco always sponsored Bob Hope, and I always remember that and they did it for decades. They always sponsored Bob Hope, and there's certain things like that I think that if you establish that link with someone over the long term, can be far more effective. And not to mention, it's just marketing 101. You need to tell people a message several times before it sinks in. And so just mentioning something once on social media is not very effective. You need to say it again and again and again and again and again.
Right. What are your obligations that you have to G Adventures, for example?
There are not really a lot of obligations. I'll travel with them. I'm going on a trip in, I think, May to the Baltics. I've never been there, so I'll be going to Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. And then I may on my own, once I'm there, do they have that 2 to 3 day trip you can do to St. Petersburg without a visa.
Right.
So I might do that.
You'll love, by the way, all those places are fantastic.
And I might go to Belarus too, because I've never been there. And they just instituted a visa on arrival if you fly in. So what I might do is go a few days early from Lithuania, fly into Belarus, because I don't need the visa. Do a couple things there. I think there's a World Heritage Site within distance. And, do the tour. And then at the end of the tour from Helsinki, go to St. Petersburg. So I haven't figured it out. But, in the course of doing that, you post stuff on Instagram and whatnot, and you do some blog posts. And I've done public speaking for them in the past. We had something planned. I don't know if it'll come about because I've been to every continent with G Adventures on their tours to do like an evening presentation, showing my photography and telling stories of the places I've been with them. Maybe doing it for their suppliers or for some of their resellers like travel agents and stuff. So we'll see.
Now, so you're basically saying that the sponsors have been one of your best revenue sources for the last few years. Is that fair to say, or would you say that you get more?
Okay. And that's, to be honest, is one of the reasons why I didn't focus on other forms of revenue, is because I was in a great position of being able to get these brand ambassadorships where very few bloggers were able to do that. So because I had a pretty good source of revenue coming from this, I didn't have to focus on display advertising, affiliate income, and all the other things that a lot of other bloggers have done.
What's interesting is that you don't seem to have to do a whole lot for it. In other words, you just have to show up to a trip to the Baltic. How hard is that?
No, there's some promotional things I have to do as well. And I'm always willing to go above and beyond for certain things if they have a request from me. And because they...
Like what?
Media promotions, things like that, because, that's a win-win. I'm always willing to do interviews. And if I just came back from a trip and, maybe doing a radio or television spot where I mentioned I went on a G Adventures trip to this place, that works for them as well. That's some free exposure.
Right.
And from a travel standpoint, so Bruce Poon-Tip, who's the founder and owner of G Adventures, he does a lot of media stuff. He's published several books. He does a lot of public speaking. And he talks a lot about the company. They do a lot of social enterprise work, helping local people create businesses, stuff like that. They talk about their corporate culture. I'm not really the person to speak about that because I don't work for the company. But from a travel perspective, talking about the trips and the tours and the destinations, I think that's what I and the other influencers in the program are probably more uniquely suited for doing.
Okay. Now, what about let me just shift to another question about Forbes. Let's say, just to pick an example, let's say if they asked you to write 7 articles a month, give you $500 for it, would you do it, or would you rather take those 7 articles, throw them across the web, or would you put them all 5 of them on your blog, 2 of them guest posting? How would you there's only so many blog posts you can write per month. And there's a certain value that you would attribute to those blog posts. What would be your logic in your thinking?
I'd probably do it for a while, especially if I could put a link in the articles. Because that, from Forbes, it can help the website. And I think that's some of the things a lot of people don't realize is that getting a link from a high-profile site like that can actually be more valuable than the money, which is not to say you're not going to take the money, but especially if it's a deep link to something that you can rank for, in the long run, that could be more lucrative than the money they pay you. Overall, I think you want to be diverse in where people find you. So, if you could get a columnist gig with Forbes, I think that would be a good thing, because then there's a certain amount of social proof in being able to say, I'm a columnist with Forbes. But overall, if it was just kind of general freelance stuff, I'd spread it around.
Okay. So, and you would take those, let's say 10 or 7 blog posts, you'd put most of them on your own website?
It depends on what the post is. If it's an informative post that people are searching on, then I would definitely want it on my website. If it's commentary or opinion, then...
Or news.
Yeah, I'm not a news person. I'm not the...
Okay.
That's the big difference, I think, between a lot of journalists and bloggers. I'm not looking for a scoop. I'm not looking for an angle. A lot of it is my thought and opinion. And so that in a traditional sense, that would make me a columnist probably more than anything else.
What do you take about the mantra that I always hear about? You got to engage with engage with your readers and reply to every tweet and reply to every comment. Part of me just this is just too much. What do you think?
It depends on what the comment is. So if you go to my Instagram account, I do not comment I do not reply to most comments because most of the comments are just very nice, great photo, wow.
Right.
They're not saying anything. I can just go thank you, thank you, thank you to everyone, but that just gets repetitive. If somebody has an actual question, like where did you take this photo? What time of day was it? What kind of lens did you use? I'll answer that. But I'm not necessarily going to acknowledge every interaction someone has unless it's something legitimate.
What places out of all, you've been to about 120 countries so far, roughly?
UN countries, yeah, but I've been to a lot of territories and stuff.
Yeah. So what comes? I know you like was it St. George Island?
South Georgia.
Georgia Island.
South Georgia.
South Georgia Island.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know you really love that place. What other 2-3 places come to mind?
I'm a big fan of northern Canada and Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Arctic is, a very under-touristed place. A lot of people don't even think about it. In the summer, if you live in the United States, you can get in a car and drive to the Arctic Circle. Most people don't know that, or they don't think about that, but you can do it. Yeah. And it's just not something that most people would think to do. There are some fantastic national parks in Canada that nobody goes to. Canadians don't even know about it because they're pretty hard to get to be honest, and they're kind of expensive. But they are some of the best parks in the world, and nobody knows about them. Nahanni National Park in the Northwest Territories, maybe the best national park on the planet. Torngat Mountains National Park in northern Labrador has some of the best fjords in the world. And most people probably aren't even aware that there are fjords in North America.
Right.
But places like that, that are just, gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska. The only way you're getting to these places is basically by float plane. And Torngats you can actually get to by ship. But there's a lot of fantastic places out there that people just don't know about.
Speaking about places that everybody knows about, but nobody gets to go to, how about the moon and Mars? If it costs like $10,000 to go there, would you go there? And would you live there?
Would I live there? No. There's nothing
how about
there.
just to visit?
Yeah.
What, okay.
I mean, assuming I can come back, it's not one of these one-way death trips or something. I have no desire to martyr myself for that. But yeah, I mean, I think that'd be really interesting. Assuming that was, something that was doable. I don't know why.
What would be the price point that would be like, okay, this is where I'm willing to bank the farm? Would it be $100,000, $50,000? I mean, $50,000 is for Everest.
Well,
so you got to think that maybe $500,000.
Going to the South Pole is going to cost you about $70,000 to $80,000. Going to the North Pole is going to cost you about $10,000 to $25,000, depending on how and what time of year you do it. So, put it in that kind of perspective. I mean, there are people right now, or in the past, who have gone into space and they've paid for it, and they paid
$20 million, I think,
tens of millions of dollars. So, I mean,
I think it was Dennis Tito was the first guy, and I think he spent $20 million. He gave it to the Soviets or the Russians.
The thing is, what do you do when you're there? I mean, if you look at what a lot of the Apollo astronauts did, they didn't go that far. I mean, the Apollo 17 guys did, but they were there for science. They were on a mission. So you go there, and then what? I mean, you can say you were on the moon.
Play golf? You go in your rover?
Yeah, you do a bunch of things that are like, oh my God, I'm in 16G. Look how high I can jump. And I suppose it's kind of like the moon equivalent of floating in the Dead Sea or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, so it would be interesting. I don't know what the price point would be. But yeah, you're probably looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of tens of thousands of dollars.
I think it's probably hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point.
For $0 because it's just not possible. Nobody can go to the moon right now.
Well, it's going to be, I mean, what's his name? Jeff Bezos was talking about coming up with a rocket ship that just doesn't land on the moon, but just does a flyby.
Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, they could certainly do that, but Man, that's a big undertaking. And I realize technology has advanced a lot, but we spent a lot of money on the Apollo program. And we're a long ways off from having that be a regular tourist thing that people could do. Because that's still a week-long trip, and a lot can go wrong. And you're stuck in a very small space, with the smells and whatnot of a lot of people. And I'll be shocked.
Well, I think in his case, it's just going to be, I think he said it's going to be just 2 people, and it's going to happen in less than 5 years. That's what Bezos says. So stay tuned.
So yeah, 2 people who are trained, and they do it just to show that they could
tourists.
Do it. No.
These are 2 tourists. Paying tourists will go in a capsule that will just go to the moon, go around the backside, I guess, and come back to Earth and land. Anyway, I understand your skepticism. So Gary, tell us about this book that has been kind of lingering in the background for a while now. What can we expect?
That's a really good question. Part of it is just focusing on the book and not other stuff, and not bothering to travel. So I've come up with a couple different ideas, and I keep changing my mind as to what I want to do. And I've kind of changed my mind again. Because, when you do a book, I'm thinking of it kind of holistically and what it's going to do for my business and speaking opportunities and things like that. So what I'm leaning to right now is some sort of book that basically is kind of a self-help book, and really just kind of encouraging people to travel and the benefits of travel.
And no idea when that could come out in the next 5 years, maybe?
Who knows?
Where can people find you? Everything Everywhere?
Everything-everywhere.com, or just search for my name, or just search Gary and travel. And I am the easiest person in the world to find online. Any combination of that, you'll probably figure out where I am.
I think Kim Kardashian might be easier.
You got to be able to spell Kardashian.
And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel technology and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to WanderLearn.com and click on the latest episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. Here's one last reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and want to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ yep, you guessed it, ftapon. That's where you can pick up some sweet rewards for as little as $1 a month. And remember, subscribing to the WanderLearn podcast helps, but downloading each episode helps even more. Please share the podcast, review it, and sign up for my newsletter at WanderLearn.com. This show was edited by Rejoice Tapon. The music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.